I think so. She does. Hey,
Okay, let's there. Hello, can you hear us on screen? Anybody on screen, can you hear us?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, there we are. And I can turn this one on, because that's my camera, and then we have the room camera, which I can move around, and any fun cameras too. Okay. Steve.
Okay, so we do not have Joan with us today. So we need someone to call the meeting to order. Sam is.
What do I am calling the meeting to order?
Awesome. Okay. So, give me one sec here. Okay, Sam, so I'm assuming you have the agenda in front of you, but I'll just walk through it with you if that's okay. So our first item would be approval of the agenda.
Yep. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda for today, please?
Oh, I just have a little.
Margaret has something about the agenda.
I would like to add what was in on the previous agenda, which was the report from the SMFDAC Design Subcommittee. Even if there's no report, I think it should be.
Okay, we removed, as you see, we removed a lot from this agenda. This is a single issue meeting.
Yeah.
We can do that. We did get a report last week, although it wasn't officially a meeting. Ralph gave us his report. We will, what I'd like to say is we will carry that on all agendas going forward. It was removed because the only thing we want to do tonight, like we don't have project updates either. You see that obviously. So anyway, but Margaret, it won't be something that is typically removed. So Sam asked if there was a motion to approve the agenda. Ralph is moving to approve the agenda, Sam.
Do I have a second?
Margaret seconded it.
All right. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the agenda is set for tonight. Now we move forward to the minutes from the last meeting, which was May 23rd, 2022. Steve, I know you mentioned there was last week's meeting, which wasn't official. So do we not have any notes from that to include? Since it wasn't an official meeting?
It wasn't. And so I had, during that meeting, someone suggested, and I agreed, it would be good to just send out the notes as well as the video. But I started thinking further about it, and because it wasn't a meeting, you had less than a Brown Act number of members discussing the topic, which is clearly the subject matter of this committee. And if we then distributed that either in notes or video to other members, we could inadvertently create a Brown Act issue, because that would be, say, I'm going to use you because you're talking to me, Sam. It would be you hearing what 4 other members of the committee had to say in a non-Brown Act.
Yeah, I mean, that part makes sense. I'm wondering, since Margaret also flagged the summary piece, which I know Ralph gave, is it possible perhaps to only include the reports potentially and not the conversation, to your point, because it wasn't an official meeting, but there were reports given, which I know we don't want to go through again, but potentially do want to have included?
No, I like your point, because those reports are what we tell staff. There's no discussion there. So, I mean, not what staff tells the committee. So let me see if we can figure out a way to do that and make those available to everybody. And then the rest of it, we just won't, because you're going to have that discussion tonight.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that was my one call it about the minutes. Anyone with any, well, I guess motion to approve the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve, and then I'll ask if there's any discussion. Tom left, so I assume he really approves of them.
Ralph moved.
Ralph moved again. Any edits, changes, comments?
I think you need a second.
Is there a second?
Oh, sorry. Margaret seconded. I missed it.
Okay. Any comments, changes, updates to the minutes? All right, all those in favor of accepting? All
got 3 yes.
opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the minutes from May 23rd are accepted, and we will look to have some type of just kind of shared report from the August 17th reports that took place.
Yeah, we'll work on something for that. I may add that to these minutes. We'll figure something out.
Thank you, Steve. Next on our list, nomination and election of chair and co-chair.
So here, what we would do is typically any member can nominate. We would do the chair first usually. Not, in other words, not like a block of both people. We would do the chair and then we would do the vice chair.
All right. Ralph, was that you volunteering to do the job or to nominate somebody?
I'm going to nominate Alexis. So Ralph has nominated Alexis.
Second.
And then Margaret seconded it. But I think, Margaret, did you have a question also, or?
So I was just wondering, since our chair isn't here, we're sort of a reduced number, do we want to hold off till the next? Or should
Certainly as a committee, if that's what you choose to do, you can.
I think we should go ahead.
Okay. Okay, did you hear all that, Sam?
Yeah, Margaret asked if we were going to hold off, but we're going to move forward with seeing if Alexis is going to accept that nomination and second.
So I just wanted to tell the group, that my concern is sometimes just my flexibility. Today I couldn't be there on, in person. That's my concern for a role like this, that I feel like we do need to be here in person on a regular basis now that we're able to.
One of the great things about being chair is that you call the meetings.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes things come up, which I think is
I know.
Alexis's point. Like today, I think she intended to be here, but sometimes you got to stick it out there.
Yeah, between having 2 kids pick up schedules and working full time, I'm just concerned that I don't have the same amount of time that Joan had to give to being here in person for the full meeting.
Nobody seems overly concerned about that.
There are nominations, but.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have any other nominations, do we?
Not
So
from my
really-
side.
Really, Alexis, it's up to you if you're willing to accept or not.
Okay, and we don't have anybody else that would like to do it?
I don't believe so. Do we want to table it, Alexis, and not put you on the spot, and you can kind of think through? Because I know it was flagged that we wanted to table it potentially.
I think if you wouldn't mind, I just really want to make sure that if I'm committing to it, I can do it as needed.
That's fair. I think that's reasonable. So we'll table the chair nomination at this point with review coming from our nominee on if she's willing to accept. Do we have any nominations for vice chair? What is it? What are we calling it?
That's a typo on my part. It's supposed to be vice chair, like you said.
Yeah. Okay. Vice chair.
You want to table both, because that might impact whoever becomes the chair. For example, Alexis may say, hey, I don't really want to do that, but I might do vice chair. You want to just table both, Sam?
Yeah, we can do that. Let's table both. We can table both in return, so.
Okay.
Just on the point of, I think it'd be helpful to tell everyone whose terms, because, I mean, someone should be in a position that has a sufficient term too, right?
Sure.
I know, I think.
No, it's a good point.
And I know you're not talking about, I'm not even sure,
When your term ended?
I guess it's already over, I don't know.
It is.
No, actually, it was extended, so I've just looked that up.
Wait, did we
And-
actually extend it?
Yeah,
Terry?
we extended all the people who were on in 2020, we extended them for another 3-year term.
Oh, we changed it to
every
3
so
years.
we did it in January of 2020, so, the following people will be, will term out in January of 2023, and that's Judith, Sam, Joan, and Thomas.
You found my email.
I did, I found your email. And then,
Was it the pandemic extension?
No, we changed it from, we did a couple things at the same time. Well, they're still staggered, but we split, remember, we used to be one committee with 2 subcommittees, and so instead we split it to 2 separate committees, and we changed the terms from 2-year terms to 3-year terms to align with the other FDACs throughout the district, and then kind of restarted the clock. So that's the board action Carrie's talking about, and we've got them all laid out, but.
So could you, Carrie, this is helpful, would you review then who's where on the terms?
sure, then that would, if that were true, then, the people who would expire, term out, in, January of 2024, would be Alexis and Amy. And then the ones who would term out in 2025 would be Margaret, Ralph, and Julie. Oh, no, Sam was part of the 2023 group.
So what we'll do is we're gonna get these put on the website so that
Yeah.
it's next to everybody's name.
The 23, Judith, Sam, myself, who's the other person?
Joan.
Joan.
Yeah.
Judith, Sam, Joan, and Thomas.
So I don't want to go too far with this. This is not an agendized conversation. I understand it was relevant, and I think that was a fair,
Just because
it was a perfect time to bring it up, but I don't want to go any.
Joan said in the last meeting she's not interested in chair again. I didn't.
She did.
Her mind was changed. It's only relevant because.
It's a fair, like I said, it's a perfectly fair point.
Couple months, but yeah, I mean, I just want to look at someone who.
Has some longevity. Okay.
Yeah,
So, Sam, I'd suggest maybe since we've tabled that, we should move on to Chairperson Report, which I'm going to guess you don't have.
I do not have a chairperson's report, so we can skip ahead to number 6, which is going to call on you, Steve, for the staff communications report.
So you gave me the opportunity to deliver it earlier because all I was going to report today is why we haven't published the meeting from last week.
Got it. Okay. I think we're all aligned with that. So we'll move forward to number 7. We'll mirror smash water intrusion issues. Steve, Carrie, and Kevin, take it away.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do, when we had originally scheduled this last week, we were doing just a discussion item. And my intent was to go, when we present this to the board, to give them a sense of what the committee expressed. However, I think I've since looked back at what we did last time, and I think it's appropriate for the committee to actually take an action and make a recommendation. Now, if you don't reach a recommendation, we've done this before, if you don't reach a recommendation, that's fine, then I can tell the board the sense of the committee. But if we can, I'd like to have a recommended action, an action from the committee recommending our course going forward. And so first we'll talk about mirror smash, and the recommended action there would either be replace the building or repair the building. And then when we get to number 8, we'll talk about it, but we're obviously going to need to eliminate some work in order to afford the mirror smash project. So the recommendation there would be which work, and I say eliminate, that's wrong. We're going to defer some work. So the recommendation from the committee there would be what gets deferred. So with that preface, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, who's going to walk us through a discussion on near Smash itself, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about budget after we have the recommended action. Does that work, Sam?
Yep, that works for me.
Okay. So Kevin, I'm gonna move the phone next to you and you take it away.
I think Kerry's got the presentation on his computer.
I do, and I've been bringing it up now. Okay. Okay, and slideshow.
All right, thanks, Kerry.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is an update on some of the work we've completed over the last several months and where we are now and what our plans are and our options are moving forward. Why don't we go to the first slide, Kerry?
Okay.
Okay, so we just wanted to sort of review some really big picture history of Smashmere. This campus was originally constructed in 1996, and it was expanded with new classrooms in 2001. From conversations with staff members who have worked at the campus either all of those years or very nearly all of those years, this campus has a long history of water leaks and water intrusion issues associated with those leaks. And there's also a long history of the district investigating those problems and making repairs and attempting to solve the problem, localized problems throughout the campus. So go to the next slide, Kerry.
Yep.
And then more recently along came the HVAC and Modernization project, which was started in the spring of 2021 and it was completed in the summer of 2022. As we were doing this work, we encountered a lot of problems. We encountered those water leaks. As we opened up spaces where we were working on air conditioning scope and modernization scope, we found mold, we found termite damage, and just general rotten structure. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we found those problems where we were working on HVAC and modernization. In other words, we weren't looking for those problems. This wasn't a water intrusion project of any kind. It was other scope, and where we did that work, we found it, which would, logic would tell you that had we been looking for it elsewhere, we would have found it elsewhere. So when we encountered these problems, we worked with our environmental consultant. We chased it to the limit of that area, and we put it back together. And we kind of knew that we weren't solving it in a holistic way for the campus, but whether it was during the summer of 2021, when we have a very specific deadline at the end of the summer, in other words, we didn't go chasing this problem at that time. We completed the work. In fact, those problems that we encountered in the summertime were a big cause of why we had such a scramble at the end of the summer last year. Every time we encounter a problem in a bathroom, we would take the wall, we would open up the walls to say replace the tile or do some, whatever scope we were doing in there. And we would encounter mold. Once you encounter mold, you call in your environmental team and it kind of inserts about a 2 to 3 week task in the middle of your schedule to remove the mold, and then you're back where you were. So that pushed our work out in the summertime, and it made it a big scramble at the end of the summer. Go to the next slide, Kerry. So in the, and then this compounded in the winter break last year, at Christmas time, we had a lot of rain, we had a lot of leaks. Some of those leaks were in areas we had just fixed. I mean, when we encountered the problem last year, we worked with our architect to identify areas on the exterior of the building where we could improve, trying to solve the leak. We did some of those things, but clearly when the rain came in the wintertime, we encountered leaks in the same areas where we had just done work. It was very disappointing, but we knew we had a bigger problem. And we engaged a team to do a wider building envelope investigation. The team consisted of Little Architecture, who was our architect already in progress on the site. They're familiar with the site. They knew a lot of the problems, and we engaged them to form a team to do this investigation. They partnered with DTR, who is an architect and a waterproofing expert, and they brought in their structural engineer, John A. Martin and Associates, and then the district separately contracted with NV5, who is an environmental consultant and industrial hygienist that we were already working with. So this team came together and they produced the findings report, and you guys
Can I ask
are somewhat yeah, of
can I
course.
ask a quick question? Sorry. So the original black mold finding was in the summer of 2021. Is that correct?
I don't think so. I mean, it's, I guess I'd have to think about this for a minute, but there's a long history at this campus of the district taking, mold issues have come up many times, and the district has responded to it. And I know that what we did is we took air samples. I'm trying to remember when it was actually that we did that first round of air samples.
Well,
Was it during spring? Was it during summer break last year?
we did, I mean,
'Cause the
when
classrooms were
we have found mold, and we have found it over the years, we've done air samples. So there are air samples in
Yeah.
2016, in 2018, and 2020. We also did them in spring of 2021, and we did, while we were doing while we discovered things, abated and removed things over the course of the summer of 2021, we also did air samples.
Yeah, the first time when we did air samples, we did find some anomalies, and that caused us to look more closely in some of these rooms. I know in one set of samples, we did find mold. I wouldn't have said it was black mold. It was mold on beneath a potted plant that had been maybe overwatered. I don't know, whatever. It was beneath a potted plant. It wasn't,
So the way we found that was the mold,
That's right.
air sampling came back as a positive, but in like on the walls and things, there was nothing identifiable as mold, and so the consultants went back in, whoever it was, went back in and found, as Kevin said, under a plant, there was a rug that was there, obviously to keep water from going all over the floor, to absorb the water, and then mold grew there. And
yeah.
so there are times where it happens, it has nothing to do with construction, but then, of course, to Sam's question, it may not have been the first time mold was found, but yes, during summer 2021, we did find mold in some areas.
We did, and they found anomalies. I mean, just to review quickly, mold is not a threshold issue. It's not, there's no established threshold for how much mold is okay. I mean, everywhere you would take a sample, you would find mold spores. It's just a organic material that's in the air everywhere. So they take the sample indoors, they take the sample outdoors, and they compare the two. And this should be similar percentage breakdown of the different type of spores, and it should be just the similar amounts. The air samples should be similar, or whatever. So they interpret them that way, by a comparative sample on the outside. So they found an anomaly in the room that we've been talking about, and I believe they found anomalies in the rooms that were right beside, these are very slight anomalies, and again, it's an interpretive threshold, beside the mulching area and
The outdoor composting area.
the outdoor composting area, which was not at that time being maintained. It was, this is a parent program, and there was nobody actually actively managing it. So the consultant said, hey, you should move that program. Anyway.
That's also not a surprise.
They weren't.
Mold's function
Yes, that's
in the
part of
environment is to
composting.
break down, which is composting. It's
Yes.
a critical element of composting.
And I believe, I'd have to go back and talk to the consultant thing. I'm not even sure they found an anomaly there. We had a student who was complaining, and they were in a room immediately adjacent to the composting area, and their recommendation was, hey, you should move that composting area. It's likely causing irritants. Anyway, it wasn't, honestly, there was not a really construction-related action to take after those. We did take actions, but they weren't really construction issues. I sort of lost track of where I was. Does that,
These were the people who were involved in
Okay.
the investigation up to this point.
yeah, does this, did you have another question, Sam? Have I answered the question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, so I mean, as I understand the timeline, it's been, there've been isolated discoveries and isolated approaches for multiple years that have
Yeah.
been focused on if an anomaly arose and, you know, eradicating or addressing that issue specifically, not the larger scale campus issue that we're now looking at with this report.
I think that's accurate. And there was actually a black mold issue that happened at the end of the school year that I think, you know, it was widely known, and it was in a classroom, and it probably was what you would consider black mold.
Right.
And I'm going to show some pictures of that in this presentation.
Right. Okay.
Kevin,
Mhm. Yeah.
So this building envelope investigation,
Yeah.
is this what the information that you've gathered to get to this point in time? Are you bringing us up to the present?
I think we're going to talk about that in the next few slides. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process and then the recommendations that came, the report on what they found and their recommendations. So does that sound like what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to give you guys a little bit of history on the process, there is an exhibit that we made as a part of this process that just compiled as much information as we could find about the history of water intrusion. This is looking at record drawings. This is looking at the maintenance history, you know, locations where we know someone has experienced a leak and attempted to fix it, and interviews, talking to staff, talking to custodians, talking to M&O. He was really finding as many instances and just putting them on a drawing and comparing that to what we had already found in the field. So let's go to the next slide, Carrie. So this exhibit led us to another follow-up exhibit, which was, so the field work happened in two phases. The first phase was over spring break, and they really focused, we timed some of our modernization work to occur at spring break while the waterproofing consultant was there. Specifically, they were replacing storefront doors, and we did that so that when they removed the storefront door, the consultant could see the assembly of the wall and it was, you know, it just seemed like an efficient way to do some work and get some investigation feedback from that. So this is an exhibit, so they did that, and then there was a follow-up field investigation that happened right at the start of the summer. This exhibit was meant to document the scope of work for that destructive investigation that followed up at the beginning of the summer. So anyway, this is just telling you guys how we documented everything that we knew and then developed a destructive investigation. And that's really then there was a report, and that will bring us to where we are now. So let's go to the next slide, Carrie. Okay, so there's a report, and I think you guys have had an opportunity to look at this report. There's hundreds and hundreds of pictures, so what I tried to do here is just really take a very, very small snapshot of the type of thing you'll find if you flip through it. There's a lot of wear and tear issues, you know, evidence of, you know, corners where kids and staff and everybody just kind of, you know, brushes up against the building and causes cracks in the exterior. There's just cracks that don't necessarily have a direct obvious cause. And then there's lots of gaps. This is a gap between the metal flashing at the top of the parapet and the stucco wall. There's many examples of things like that. So there were some more obvious problems. These pictures were taken, actually these were taken during the first investigation. This is classroom 480, where they were replacing a storefront door as part of our modernization scope. It's just really obvious evidence of obvious problems. One of the things that the left picture is specifically showing, those red lines were drawn there by DTR, and they're saying that the assembly of this door does not conform to the drawings that were prepared for the expansion in 2001. It was just flashed incorrectly. Things are not offset from the doorway like they should be, and just, you know, direct evidence of, if you talk to the waterproofing consultant and you talk to like Michael Burke, the architect, they're more familiar with flashing details and how you prevent water from entering the building. you know, this has it's an obvious waterproofing problem. This is just more, you know, just dry rot, water damage, insect damage,
Kevin,
and it,
on that one, you said it's an obvious problem, but is it true to say that it's obviously a problem, but when everything was built and covered up, it was not an obvious problem?
I think to a very trained waterproofing expert, there were problems they spotted before in areas that were not disassembled, and I don't know if this is one of them, but there were, yes.
Oh, sorry. I think similar to what was just being asked, I'm wondering what, in terms of, I think, you know, the board would ask the same, why it was, the flashing was installed incorrectly to begin with. And wasn't there a waterproofing consultant on site to sign off on these things?
I don't think there would have necessarily, well, there would have been certain sign-offs. Now you're talking about something that happened 20 years ago, so I'm not sure.
It would be hard to
But
find the
typically-
records, but I think you would want to be able to present that as, you know, due diligence as to if that was signed off or not, because that's a pretty typical process to have a waterproofing consultant on site when these are done, because you can't see it after it's done.
Well, you would have inspections. You would have the architect who designed the building making visits, and they don't see everything, but some of these problems were so pervasive that you would have hoped they would have caught them.
Typically what they do is review a mock-up, right?
That is a typical process. You know, we have no way of knowing what the process was here. Typically, there would be a roofing warranty, and you'd have a roofing, whoever is providing the warranty would have some, usually the manufacturer of the roofing material will do an inspection in addition to the installer, because they are providing a long-term warranty, the installer is providing a short-term warranty. So usually you'll have like the whoever is selling the system that the contractor is installing doing inspections, but it's really hard to know what happened at that time. This is not recent. But just one more thing on the pictures. If you look closely on the right, it's a little hard to read, but that's a moisture sensor, and they're reading 30% moisture content in the wood of the door. I mean, it shouldn't be that. It should be maybe 10%. That's just, you know, wood does have moisture in it, but 30% is really high. And there's other areas in the report where they detected 40%. I mean, these structural wood, the wooden structure is just soaked, and it's been wet for a long time because it well, I can't remember what the weather had been for like a couple weeks before. There may have been a rain event a week or two before, but anyway, it should never be this. Go and take a look at the next slide, Terry.
Yep.
And just another example, one of many, is this is the second floor guardrails. This is the walking deck and the guardrails. They peeled back the flashing at the base of the guardrail, and the structure is just severely depleted. This is above this is an area where we have had water intrusion issues below. The structural attachments on the right, this particular one is not attached to really much of anything. Now, I'm showing you the worst of the worst. And not all the guardrails look like this, but this one, obviously, there was some evidence that caused them to look here, and this is what they found. And it's an obvious problem. It's an obvious problem that we would need to address immediately, now that we know it's there. Terry, let's go to the next one.
Kevin, I have a question for you. The door assemblies that you were showing us in the previous slide that
Yes.
were deficient in their installation, is that universal to the entire campus?
Maybe not, I'm not sure if universal is the right word, but it seems to be widespread, because they were replacing 4 storefront doors in, you know, different areas of the campus, and I think they found the same problems, or very similar problems at each. Would you say that? Would you agree, Michael?
It is. Obviously, there are troubles at those particular locations, but we'll never know how many were, you know.
We might know, because we might be,
I think we will.
we might be finding out in this project.
We'll find out.
Is
But
it 2001, or is this the 96 building, or what?
I think it's mainly the 96 build, I think it's both, actually.
Both.
It's both.
Oh, we had confidence on.
Just,
Consistent incompetence.
One of the big problems is the expansion joint between the addition and the original building. So this is one known area where we got trouble. The joint that separated the new building from the existing in 2001 is one clear example of a bad expansion joint. Just get that definite.
so just taking a very broad brush and summarizing some of the conclusions made in the report, I think we've all heard one of the most impactful statements was that the buildings are in poor to moderately poor condition with specific deficiencies related to age and other construction issues. So that was a big sweeping statement that was, I think, discussed at board meetings, and it came from this report. The horizontal and vertical building enclosures are failing. That basically means all of the roofs and all of the walking decks are failing. The vertical stucco surfaces are failing. The windows and doors are failing. There's water coming in at all locations. And additional water intrusion is likely to be concealed, which is kind of what I touched on earlier. We found it in places where we were working and places where we looked, but we didn't look everywhere. But we have a plan in this next project for how we will find it and how we can say with confidence that we have looked everywhere. There's a high potential for additional mold growth and structural deterioration in some locations. In the writing of the report, it said, I actually forget how it was worded, but basically the structural engineer was not willing to vouch for the structural integrity of the classroom. And so when we went back to do the follow-up destructive investigation, we went to one of the, where we all agreed it was the worst problem. And just to circle back on that statement, if anybody remembers it, they did verify, okay, that the building's not falling down. It's got problems, we've got structure to replace, but it's not a situation where everybody needs to evacuate immediately. Just wanted to circle back on that particular issue. Go to the next slide, Carrie. And so now we'll talk about some of the recommendations, which I kind of just said, replacing the horizontal surfaces, which are the roofs and the second floor walking decks. And for those who haven't been to Smashmere, there are many second floor walking decks. Replacing all the vertical surfaces, which is all of the stucco. This is just a picture of it's just a very complex building. There's lots of edges, lots of corners. Nothing is really, it's not like a big, straight, two-story face of a building. It's a very complex structure. And then the actual recommendation is to remove and reinstall all doors and windows. Some will have to be replaced, but the basic recommendation is we're going to take all these windows out. We're going to start over by reflashing everything around them and reinstall the windows. This is again, there's some more detailed recommendations, but these are the big picture stuff. Sorry. And the scope will also include mold remediation. You asked Sam about this. This is the black mold, I would say. It was found in room 415, right at the end of the school year. This is one of the areas where we will be remediating the problem, and I'm sure we'll find many others. But this is just to say we're going to have a mold remediation scope, and we're going to have a structural. This is interesting because you see the wood there is treated white, and Thomas, I think that you sent an article this week. I believe that white wood was treated at that time. There was an article that Thomas found from the Santa Monica Daily Press. It was a 20-year-old article. It was so old the construction workers were literally smoking cigarettes with their hard hats on. But I believe it was not specific, but just from the pictures, I believe that the work was done in this room, and they treat that treatment is a antimicrobial, antibacterial, whatever. It's meant to inhibit mold growth. And when we opened the wall, we knew something had been done there at some point in the past, but we didn't. It could have been worse. So anyway, Carrie, let's keep moving.
Okay.
Just one question on the article went, of course, it's public record. After the meeting last week, because my child went to Smashmere, and I have observed things there myself. But one thing I was curious, because it looked like it was two rooms that were, like, really impacted, and they remediated. Were those rooms re-looked at? I mean, besides that one photo?
Well, I believe, okay.
I don't know, you know, I don't, those were two, I don't know if those were the same.
If I had to guess, if I was standing like where the tree is and looking at room 415 is kind of on the,
Yeah.
well, there's the two classroom building over here. Room 415 is on the left, and I believe the other one was the one to the right. You know, when we investigated 480, which is above 415, actually the damage wasn't that bad. There was leaks, there was water, but the damage was on the first floor. So I believe, and in talking to the teachers, there used to be a water leak problem in that other room, and I think it's less of a problem now, so I believe it was those two rooms. And the picture appears to be, to me, it appeared to be from one of those two rooms.
That's good. I mean, I just think because obviously it was a significant issue 20 years ago, it was remediated, there was the industrial hygiene, this whole thing that you're doing.
I know.
Yeah.
And, you know, to guide the board, and I think to make a good decision, whatever happened 20 years ago, is damn relevant, right?
Yes.
You know, did it work, right? And, you know, 20 years is a long time, but, like, to me, I would want to get approved that, because there's gonna be a similar type of remediation. I assume there's probably better chemicals today, things like that.
Probably.
You know, to think about.
Maybe not. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes we take all the good stuff out because it's
I'm just saying,
harmful.
I'm like, just because, if this was a fresh issue, like, just, let's say that just last 2 years, it's one thing. This is like a systemic,
Mhm.
from the time of construction. What, I know that no one in this room is involved in the construction of that building, but anyway.
It is, and I mean, I think your point's important, which is why this is a much more comprehensive fix, right? Like, we're not looking for a leak, we're not fixing, right, or in those two rooms, and we're not fixing, you know, just the fact that, well, we've got mold in there and we'll fix the leak on the outside. I mean, this is reskinning the entire building, and, you know, so I think, to your point, yeah, we can't do what we did 20 years ago, because otherwise we're gonna be back here again in, well, probably less than 20 years. And those repairs may have worked for a time, or they may have worked entirely, and now an additional leak has shown up that wasn't leaking at the time, right? So, so that's kind of why here we're looking at it saying, you know, if we're gonna repair this, we need to really repair this. And so that's the plan, or the project that we're looking at.
Yeah, similarly, the work that we did 6 years, 4 years, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, have not solved the problem, which is why we have to go to a much more drastic solution.
So here's just some milestones that are relevant to our timeline. We would, we hope to award a contract for design at the meeting on September 1st. We would like to begin the process, and we'd like to have a leaseback contractor hired and working by December of this year. And you know, we also have input from architects. We would like to have DSA approval of plans by April of next year, and then start work immediately in April. And our plan is to be back in school for the 2024-2025 school year. Go ahead, Carrie.
Good.
Okay, so we have, part of this, this task, this report that we did was to estimate the cost. And some of you who, you know, heard everything I'm saying last week may notice we adjusted the numbers here, and I'll explain why we did that. But we have a cost estimate. The total cost in the cost estimate is actually $8.5 million. But as we talked to the cost estimator and we talked internally last week, there are certain things that were not included in that estimate. Most notably, there was no site work included in that estimate, and there are drainage problems that are not related to the building. There are areas of the campus that flood, and that flooding gets into classrooms. It's almost, I don't know, coincidental that this also happens on this same campus, but it is a problem that we will address in this project. So anyway, so we added $500,000 in just general site costs. The reason, you know, when I spoke to the cost estimator, the reason that they did not include any scope for that is because they don't have any drawings. They don't have anything to estimate. And so we believe that's probably more than we will need for site costs, but anyway, just so you guys know, that's how we got from $8.5 million to $9 million. we have a contingency of $3 million. That's a big contingency because we have, I don't know how to say this, but it's, okay, let me back up a little bit because I didn't really tell you all of the details of scope. So as we replace the exterior stucco, we will expose the wood siding, the plywood that's on the building. Now, we'll be working from the outside in, and the consultants have advised us that we really want to get a good look at the sill plate of the building because any water intrusion, as it works its way down, we expect we would have evidence on the sill plate. So we want to remove the bottom 4 feet of plywood all around the second floor, all around the first floor, and that will give us a good look at the sill plate. If we see a clean sill plate, that would be a very strong indication that there's no water leaks happening above that location. And if we see problems, we will go looking, and that is where the contingency comes in. We do not have, well, I should say our architects really don't have a good handle on where we might find that and how far we might chase. So the total expected cost of the project at this point is $12 million. That would be to do everything that we've talked about so far.
You say the total expected cost, but you mean the construction cost?
The construction cost, thank you, Steve.
No problem.
Yes.
Construction cost, okay, including, design fees?
No.
So it's just construction cost.
Just construction,
We'll get to the total
okay.
project cost in a little bit.
This is a slide that I included to talk about, other, I think a lot of this will be funded by the bond, I assume. But there are other opportunities that we have been talking, we have funding consultants that are helping us pursue other funding. For instance, at the end of the school year, beginning of summer actually, when we found that black mold, we had a meeting with OPSC where they observed the mold, they concurred that this is a imminent health and safety issue and that they are likely to fund a portion of that remediation for that specific room.
Office of Public School Construction.
Thank you. Office of Public School Construction.
That's a state.
It's a state office. Office of Public School Construction. They administer many types of funding that are, relevant to what we do. And they, in order to qualify for the funding that they administer, you have to follow very specific procedures and a step-by-step process. And so we have, I will say, I think we're well positioned to maybe get funding for this because we've started working with our consultants early.
To get some funding.
To get some funding. This is like, so for instance, that problem, it's like, let's just say it was in this room. There's mold on that wall. They will fund the cost, they will fund a portion of the cost to address that issue at that location. Meaning if we find other mold in other places, they may not. They may say, well, that other mold is not really a dangerous mold. It's just an irritant that, is not an imminent, so they're gonna allocate that funding to some other school with some other problem. The other kind of threshold question that may or may not be relevant for us is when you compare the cost of your project to the estimated cost to replace the whole building. The 50% threshold is a big deal in a lot of cases. For instance, with DSA, if you get to the 50% threshold, they'll say, well, really you ought to probably consider replacing this building. And if you're not going to replace the building, then we are going to require you to do significant structural upgrades. If it's a 80-year-old building, we're going to want you to bring it up to current earthquake code, right? And so and then when you get to that point and you add in now that requirement, you kind of go like, okay, well now we're spending 80% of the cost, we might as well replace the building. So they will make it less desirable to rehabilitate the building by requiring you to bring it to current code. As far as OPSC, as far as this funding, they have a similar threshold. If your repair is less than 50% of the, let's just say if it's more than 50% of the cost, they would encourage you to replace the building. I don't think anyone ever makes you replace the building, but they can make things more difficult if you don't.
When you say that the OPSC is unlikely to fund new classrooms.
Okay, so yeah, good question.
Are these considered new, if there's a replacement strategy?
So if we got, if we got to the point where we said we have to replace these buildings, OPSC is likely to say, okay, well, Santa Monica's already got plenty of classrooms. You don't need them. Other school districts need it more than you do, so we're gonna allocate this funding somewhere else.
Based on enrollment,
Yeah, based on enrollment and,
Yeah.
and their particular calculation of how many kids can fit in a classroom.
Right.
Which is more than either our union agreements or our educational plan says.
But you can see why they would use that as their criteria for allocating money. State allocation board is looking at this, they have to figure out who needs this money. And if they can say, those kids over there, whatever the community is, they've got the space, these people don't, you know where the money's going, so.
So, the two things that can, help us get this type of funding are, again, imminent, that we have to have an expert that identifies something as an imminent health and safety issue. It could be an environmental issue like mold, or it could be a structural issue like maybe those guardrails. That's why I highlight those guardrails, because I'm hoping we can frame that as an imminent safety issue that we can then say, hey, obviously this is a problem that we need to replace our guardrails, and hopefully they can fund, maybe the replacement of all of the work associated with that. So we're working with our funding consultant, we're seeking some of those other sources.
Right. But I would say, when we look at the building, there is significant work to be done on the decks, the roofs, the walls have to be reskinned. But at the same moment, the structure is sound. There are some places where we're going to have to replace some plywood, some boards in some places, but the entire structure is sound. For the most part, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, foundations, interiors, HVAC, mechanical, so much of that campus is functioning that we think that the repair is the appropriate pathway.
Question about the sort of upgrades that might be looked at if you're removing skin.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of, are there any recommended or desirable improvements as far as sustainability or insulation or?
There might be, those types of, yes, there might be. Those types of things are likely to drive the cost of the project higher. So the $9 million budget is really putting back something very similar to what we had before.
Mm-hmm. Currently, what are the features for insulation and just
Well, I think,
24 type of thing?
I think that we should acknowledge, this is not an 80-year-old building. This is a 25-year-old building. And so for DSA, this is not a structural upgrade from the 40s to now. It's from the 90s to now, which is look, there are many structural codes that have been changed since then, but we're hopeful that they're less likely to consider that 50% threshold as relevant in this case.
I think there are some upgrades we are looking at, things like the type of waterproofing that we'll have behind.
That's correct.
So we know this has been an issue here, right, and water intrusion is an issue here. So when we're coming back now, our plan is instead of coming back with traditional building paper and then, the stucco on top of it, we're looking, I think, at a liquid applied membrane. Is that right, Kevin?
That's correct.
It's a higher level of protection for the building, slightly more expensive, but with a building like this and with the issues we've had there, I think it's probably perfect.
Has any consideration, with the ed specs that are out there and all of the talk that's been circulating about trying to, make campuses more responsive to a sort of ideal configuration?
So what we're looking.
Is there any way that those two could meet in this process?
We're not really looking to make those meet, because this is still our second youngest elementary school, and it already incorporates a lot of the sort of newer ideas of education. And our difficulty is when we look across the district, we've got multiple 80-year-old and 60-year-old and kids in bungalows that are 30 years old. So far, unless the board gives us a different direction, the direction is to spend the amount of money to properly fix this campus, but save other funds for other campuses. Because if we were talking about a real rebuild of this campus, where, of course, if we were to tear it down and rebuild it, we would want to build it to our ed specs, we'd be talking probably 50 million?
Probably 60.
Yeah. So the feeling is that we'd rather stay in the 12 to 15 in this place and spend that money at the schools that really need it.
But I think, and it brings up a point, I mean, Carrie, you said it in an interesting way last week. This campus is already the one that is probably closest to meeting the ed specs. Maybe not in terms of physical square footage per room, but the way it's laid out.
The organization.
Because it was designed to be an alternative, well, at least part of it was designed to be an alternative schoolhouse, which is really focused on project-based learning. So it's already the one that's kind of partway there. But to Carrie's point, if we were, or to your, really the underlying point of your question, if we were rebuilding this campus, we wouldn't rebuild this campus. We would build a new one, which would probably be bigger and slightly different to focus more on ed specs.
And then I think the other issue that's sort of hanging over the sort of unstated issue is whether the campus is needed, whether the district has assets that can be employed to accommodate these schools in a trend of declining enrollment where and I know there was great fear, I heard this at the school board meeting on the part of many of the Muir families, that Muir was not going to come back, that the district, the board would decide, such a small school, do we need a campus there? So, I mean, I think that's another question that I would imagine, but maybe not, you would be asked by the board, do we need this?
I mean, at this point, the board has been pretty clear that they want a neighborhood school there. As we had to displace everyone, the only living solution was for us to go to SMC and move 4 programs to SMC to fit. It wasn't like we just had the ability to put a bunch of, so we feel that there is still a need both for a neighborhood school and for a school site to support programs there. We also think that compared with some new construction, I mean, I'd rather actually rehabilitate this campus, it seems, than spend a lot more money on other campuses, trying to get them, to the place where we need them. The other part of it is that, yes, if we go back in time or if we follow the CDE, California Department of Ed, standards of how many kids you can fit in a classroom, yeah, we could probably do without a whole campus, but that's not the way we're wanting to teach, and that doesn't meet our educational needs. Even our schools where we have previously packaged 800 kids, we say those schools work much more functionally better with 600 kids. So we feel like we still need a campus there. I mean, when we take an overall analysis of where we need it. So, and we think that compared to the building of new buildings, the rehabilitation of this building and making it waterproof and safe for students again, $15 million is actually not that big a price tag for what we get, as opposed to throwing it away.
Why don't we go through those cost comparisons?
Yeah.
So this is as much a, this is a funding exercise, more so than they are numbers that we would actually expect to spend on these projects. But if you look at the top row, it's the estimated cost to repair. Okay, so you'll notice that's lower than the number you saw previously, and part of the reason is I did not add the site work cost in there, so if I round that up to 8.1. The other is the delivery method. So this is a design, bid, build, delivery method. The other method, which we are proposing to use, is a leaseback method. It's a best value selection process as opposed to a low bid selection process. We would have a better partnership arrangement with our contractor, and especially considering the amount of unknown work that we expect to encounter. It would be a better relationship. It would be a better value to the district, we believe, to go with a lease-back model than it would be to go with a design bid build model. Even though the base bid might be lower, there are other challenges that lead us to select the other method. The second section, recently completed modernization costs. This is really probably most meaningful to DSA. And actually, that number is closer than I thought it was to last week. So I think it's 5.4 is actually the final number. Anyway, so for DSA, if you get beyond 50% of the replacement value, they would be likely to layer on extra costs. So they won't just allow you to include the cost of the current project. They don't want you to piecemeal previous projects. So they would require you to add in everything you've spent over the last 3 years, which in this case would be the HVAC and modernization project. Okay, so taking those two together, we would have about a $13 million, renovation cost to renovate plus recently completed costs.
But,
now that doesn't.
Wait, but Kevin, sorry, but you just already said that the first number is low. It really should be 8.1.
You're right.
And you've got a $3 million contingency because, as we've already admitted, as we've heard everyone admit here, this building has been mismanaged from the get-go. And so as we open up walls, there's going to continue to be issues that need to be remediated. So we're well above 50%.
So, okay, so
let's call a spade.
Kevin, Sam, I hear you, but there's another thing that you're gonna see here. We're above 50% of that 27.7 million. That's not a real number. For one thing, it uses, and Kevin's gonna go through all this, but it uses a depressed number. So you see that as $620 a square foot. Our construction costs for school construction over the past 3-4 years have been 50% higher than that. So I hate this slide, no offense, Kevin. I hate this slide because it's not about actual numbers. It's only about the comparison using a particular formula between cost to repair, including modernization, which by the way is a sunk cost, and again, using that same farcical formula, the cost to replace the buildings. So, I mean, I hear you, Sam, and your point is well made because it doesn't make sense when you're looking at it in this sense. But none of these numbers are real. They're just used for a relative comparison between one method and the other. If we're doing it, go ahead.
But Steve, I respectfully, what we've heard in this outline is that the site hasn't been managed and the repair work that's been done hasn't been impactful. And so, yeah, it's sunk cost, but it's a whole lot of sunk cost that's been lost on a building. And what's the confidence level in the next set of work actually remediating the issues at hand? And frankly, that the contingency is going to cover what we continue to find as we open up walls and as we dive into these things. I mean, part of it is the fact that it is a unique structure, right? That creates challenges for waterproofing, for sealant, for all those types of things. We've got threshold issues that we're going to discover and continue to discover throughout. So, I mean, I think in some ways we're just kind of throwing out numbers and hoping they're the right numbers, but there's not a whole lot of confidence in these numbers from my perspective. These numbers, the future numbers you come with, I mean, what I'm most confident in is the numbers where you say you're spending $900 a square foot on construction, like, because that's the reality, and I get that, but I think that there's a whole lot of missing parts here where we simply just say repairing it is going to cost us this, and this is the course of action we should take. When I do think one of the challenges, again, it's an important campus. It's not a campus that should just disappear, but we are looking at allocating resources in a different way, which is the second conversation we still have to get to. But it's a major change in how those resources are allocated and what that means to the district as a whole.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, what I would say is for the first action item, if you will, this committee should make a recommendation that the analysis is gonna be, forget about what we've spent, because that HVAC and modernization project, money has been spent, period, and it's not coming back. So adding that in for a comparison to get to 50% is relevant for DSA, but honestly, it's not relevant for you. Going forward, we've got a repair cost, and our best guess estimate right now is, including contingency, around $12 million. The cost to replace this building, comparing it to rebuilding the exact same building is silly, because if we are gonna tear this down, we're not gonna build the exact same building. It's probably gonna be 55,000 square feet, not 45,000 square feet. And obviously, it'll be a different building, and it'll be somewhere around that $900 to $1,000 per square foot construction cost.
And it'll be several years.
And it'll be several years. It'll be at least 2 years longer and maybe more, but probably around 2 years longer. So your comparison is more like, hey, for cost purposes, we're looking at something like, and again, I'm only using construction numbers, not total project cost numbers, but we're looking at something like $13 million versus $55 million. And then the time element that Ralph brought up. But at the same time, to your point, Sam, it still is an older building that is now going to be repaired. Although we think it's one of the closest buildings to meeting our campuses, I guess, to meeting our ed specs, it also is not meeting our ed specs. So if we were gonna build it new, we would meet our ed specs. That's the discussion you guys need to have to make a recommendation to the board. Our staff recommendation at this point is repair the building, do it right, but repair it. But we don't get to make the recommendation on your behalf. That's why you're doing this. So I hear the argument you're making. I think maybe we should get through the end of this presentation and then have that discussion, and you guys can come up with your recommendation.
Actually don't. Okay, sorry.
Does that work, Sam?
Yeah, that's fine. I think, I think we need to be more in depth around the cost to repair, because I think, again, we're conflating different numbers and we throw out different numbers, and yeah, I can say 55 versus 13, but those aren't accurate. So we can finish up the presentation and then have that conversation. That's fine. But
We
go ahead, Kevin.
can't actually be accurate.
But we could share with you the very, very detailed estimate. I mean, because we're not just playing, the number we're talking about is not an air graph. It was developed by, Cumming Corporation, which is, one of the top estimators for education.
Let me go through this slide, because I think some of these questions might be answered. So so that number at the top, 765, the other number I swapped that number out right before this meeting, and I didn't really think about this slide. Okay, the purpose of this is to compare their estimate to rehab the building to their estimate to replace the building. They added in the recent cost to come up with an overall, rehab plus recent number. The cost to replace the building follows a very specific set of guidelines for coming up with that number. And one of the things it excludes is site work. That does not include site work. The number at the top does not include site work. The goal here was to make some apples to apples comparisons between numbers. Okay, so they aren't the right real numbers that we would spend, but I mean, I hate to say it, but this is kind of a dangerous slide, because that wasn't the point of this slide, okay? So, and I know it may not make sense, but the goal of the other slide was for us to come up with everything we know today. What do we think the actual cost of the project would be based on what we know today? This one is an exercise. So and really it's a DSA exercise. It doesn't even really matter to OPSC. It might matter to you guys, because you guys also might say, well, hey, if we're spending a certain percentage, they might affect your decision of what you think we should do.
But this group knows that cost per square foot percentage that we get from this estimate and that DSA says is not real. I mean,
that's right.
So the problem with this slide, the problem with the slide up and down is that it's an exercise that DSA structures that everybody knows does not live in reality.
Okay, so when you to come up with the third section, the estimated cost to replace the buildings, DSA has they have a bulletin that talks about how you can do this. They give you a cost per square foot, which you can use. That's one option. It's like 470, I don't know, I can't remember what it is. It was lower than this, and we decided it was too low. The other option would be to just go out and find another project with the scope that you need in the, like very similar sort of utilitarian elementary school replacement project, and you can just give them that and they'll use it. Another option would be to do your own detailed cost estimate. And of those three options, we decided to work with Cumming and come up with our own detailed cost estimate for the replacement. They're still required to like follow certain parameters, and I would have to get them involved to find out if there are other parameters. But like, for instance, this number does not include demolition. Obviously, that's a cost we would pay, but it's excluded from the analysis that DSA gives you. You cannot include the cost to demolish the buildings. It doesn't include site work. And there may be other things that it doesn't include, but it's following their parameters. We actually got the cost estimate. It was probably $585 or something per square foot. And we said, go back, that doesn't look right to us, go back. And they went back and they did it again, and they came up to $620. So if you add the estimated cost to repair plus the recently completed work, add those together, compare it to the 50% of replacement cost, you're at 47%. Actually, you're at 47% of the total cost. You know, you're not really at the 50% level just yet, but you're close. So maybe that's all we can talk about on this slide. But that's really the end. You go ahead.
Okay,
Thomas.
last.
Just on the, because I know we talked about this last week, of the 5.4 million, right, is what has been spent?
Yes.
Is there an estimate of how much of that it's been spent, but any of it's gonna be reused, or?
Most.
I know some of it, what percentage?
Yeah.
300%?
A lot of it, some of it will have to be
Some will be scrapped.
reconfigured.
I mean, that included like all new floors, right?
It did. A lot of interior finishes.
I mean, not even reused, that's staying in place. Then HVAC equipment may need to come off the roof, but that stuff, same stuff's going right back on it. I would say the vast majority of that is not a lost cost.
Well, I think that helps you, I guess, here's my coaching point. You know, for a lot of people, you know, that's a lot of money that's been spent, and I think some people question why it's spent, and why didn't we know about it? We know there's been a mold issue, right, for 20 years. It's not like it was a secret when things started. So I think having that number would be useful. You know, I think it helps people think that, hey, it just wasn't all wasted, and maybe it's 3.8 million. I don't know what the number is, but I think.
I would feel that it's a good question. It's probably significantly higher because, you know, the doors that were replaced,
You're gonna put them back.
we're gonna put them back, but they're fixed, right? It's not everything, but I mean, in some cases, those are fixed. I think the windows, we touched the windows?
No.
Okay, never mind. Windows, doesn't matter, because there's
Few.
money on it.
The HVAC equipment.
HVAC,
I know there's some reinstall cost, right? There's gonna be costs to
There's
take
a
it off.
cost to it, right.
So I just think that would help your, I guess, public, because that, part of it is
Yeah.
the committee, to give you insights into how
I appreciate
voters
that.
think. And I think it's a lot of money. And,
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be like in your own house, if you spend much and you thought, well, it's all gone. We can all base on costs as business people, but
sure. But if, for example, we had just re-roofed the building, and now the answer was, we need to tear that off
Yeah.
and re-roof the building, that'd be a problem. We don't have that here. This stuff was all stuff that, almost all is going to continue. Flooring, you know, some walls need to be repainted because we're right outside, that's fine, but everything else was repainted. No, I mean, the fire alarm system, there may be some removal and reinstallation.
Right.
System's still gonna be there. So it's a great question, and one maybe we didn't.
I just wanna have it, I think, as people, especially when, you know, there's 2 points of the allocation later.
Yeah.
There's a break point in this, at the first phase where you're going, do you immediately start doing the work, or you have to do a set of drawings, right?
Yes.
And that's just based on the report you have, or will there be additional research done to do that set of drawings?
Michael, why don't you answer that one?
It'll be a full set of drawings.
His question was, is it just based on the reports that we received?
Or
No.
you're gonna keep this, before we have, there's gonna be an opportunity to revisit. So we'll spend whatever, a couple $100,000, and we'll have an opportunity to revisit it. I would guess that we recommend the board to go ahead with that. But it's clear to me that all the other questions that came up about, you know, school size, SMFDAC, all those things put this school down the road 3-5 years or more. I don't think that's, I personally don't think that's appropriate. We have a school that, if it were fixed up, is serviceable for another 25 plus years. So, you know,
Say
we
30.
want to be a neighborhood school, just to go down that other road, just chasing, you know, even if this costs 20 million or a little more, it's still less, you know, less than half of a new school and having this. And as you said, we've got kids at the college right now. So we lose that continuity for an excessive amount of time.
Then we have a clock on that also, because the college is planning to demo those buildings that we're in.
So, you know, typically this thing, and when would that next stage report come back, Mike?
Well, again, the report is what they found, just looking at where
I
they
mean,
go.
you know, the drawings with the next estimate.
Oh, probably about three months. We start again, and that's
Yeah.
time to get the.
So I think that's an opportunity to, I think it's a great opportunity, actually, a great strategy to do that, and then come back and be able to see if the assumptions are correct, or way out of whack, or tell us where we go.
And if they're out of whack, we need to reconsider it.
Then we,
Right.
really, and, you know, your reconsideration.
Yeah,
Make that decision now, to just throw it all away, I think would be irresponsible.
so the board decisions would be, you know, on September 1st, we will do this report, and they will potentially approve the architect to do this work. And then
Without that comparison.
yeah, and then, right, and then the next board decision is they would approve the lease-back contractor to do the pre-construction services. And then as we're going through DSA, you know, before the work actually begins, they have to approve the GMP, or, you know, guaranteed maximum price for the lease-back contractor. So we have milestones that the board has to keep going, you know, along the way to make sure, you know, and we have checks at that moment if we find something if we find that this is gonna be a whole bigger animal, and along the way, we'll get other estimates, and we'll also get the actual price from the contractor, knowing that, you know, they might still we won't uncover everything. But, we feel like it's it's a staged, progress that we think is in the right direction.
Anyway, I would just recommend.
So essentially, you're saying, break down, our recommendation is not a blanket recommendation for the entire.
Well, that's not what's being asked.
What's that?
That's not what the board is being asked. It's being asked at this point, engage just the team to do the next phase of work. And then they'll come back periodically.
And the reason that matters is because if the answer was tear the building down, we should not be hiring these people to do this work.
How much you said that, like, between the two contracts, almost $2 million between that.
Well, the first contract, which is the architect's contract, is
1.2. 1.2 million, right around, 1.1.
That's all the way through.
yeah,
That's through all the design.
That's all consultants.
But in fairness.
and
when we-
construction administration.
But in fairness, when we award the entire thing. We just won't direct them to go, they need our approval to go beyond design development, or each phase.
We'll do it $200,000.
Yeah, the preliminary service, I think, was a couple, 200-300.
Have another review.
So just to clarify
Yeah,
that,
but we don't want to need, we're not gonna ask the board to go back to the board and check with them every single section, because that just doesn't happen.
No, but-
We get permission to move forward,
You'll have information,
yeah.
and you'll say, if it gets to,
If it doesn't go the way we expect,
out of
then we
whack,
come back.
you'll say, whoa, we've got to.
Exactly. If it's going the way we expect, we already got direction, we're gonna keep going forward. But if something goes sideways, then all of a sudden we realize, oh Jesus, we missed something worse than expected exists, then we need to reconsider, and at that point, we step back and come back to you and go back to the board. But if we get direction from the board to go forward with this, unless something changes, we just keep going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that decision was the 3 million, right? I mean, that's why it was a big contingency. So what I'm saying is the threshold decision, if you thought that it was worse than 3.
Okay, so that's a good way to look at it. Is
Yeah,
if,
I mean, that's really
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
now, but we're expecting a portion of that to not be known until we're in construction, right? So, I mean, because some of that's gonna be how far do we have to chase this? What is uncovered when we get the entire building stripped, as opposed to the spot locations that we've done so far. But yes, I think if we saw something that made us say, Jesus, even that's not enough, maybe we need to look at it again and reconvene. Sam, you had a question?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm circling back to the cost issues, and now I'm frankly even more shocked that, did I hear that correctly, that the estimate from the architect is $1.1 million on an $8 million remediation? Is that what I just heard?
Their fee, yeah.
And that's a recommendation that the staff is comfortable providing, that the architect should be providing that kind of work for an $8 million remediation?
Yes, so there's a couple.
That's a yes or no question. So it sounds like the answer is yes. So I guess my second question would be, when Kevin just did the presentation around coming corporations estimates, which again, I understand, the arguments around DSA, et cetera. Cumming came back with it sounded like $580 a square foot. They were asked to bump that up and bumped it up to $620. You're seeing between $900 to $1,000 per square foot in terms of your construction costs. So I guess I'm confused as to our confidence level around the estimate of $176 a square foot around the remediation work, if that's coming from the same estimators that are off by, one, you already asked them to increase it, but they're off by, $300 to $400 per square foot on what you're seeing as your construction costs.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you're saying because they're off on what we're seeing as new construction, there's a decent chance they're also off by, say, 50% on remedial work. Am I picking that up correctly, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing that they're off significantly in your new construction estimates. So why would their remediation estimates be deemed as accurate?
Sure. So part of that is that the new construction estimate, as Kevin said, doesn't include demolition or site work. When I tell you we're seeing $900 to $1,000 a square foot, that's total project construction costs, including site work, utilities, everything like that, which their estimate didn't have because it was for a different purpose. So I hear you. It's not that I have a lack of faith. It's that they were analyzing two different things, which is why I don't want anyone to look at it and say, well, it's only $27 million to build a new building, because I promise it's not. So it isn't that we don't think that they did a good job. It also isn't that we asked them to increase their costs. We brought up some things that we think they didn't consider, and when they considered those, it increased by $40 a square, whatever that cost difference was there.
They also came out and did an additional site visit between the first and the second.
They did. We walked the site with them to understand the complexities of the site.
So I mean, I hear your question, Sam, and again, I think it's a fair one, but I don't, and I probably gave the wrong impression. I don't want to give the impression that, hey, I don't think these people are giving us a good estimate. I'm saying that the thing they're estimating isn't the thing that we should consider, even if it's the thing that DSA is going to consider. Does that make sense?
No, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, I have a hard time. I have a hard time accepting their estimates in terms of the remediation work, especially with so much unknown. And I mean, I think, you've built in, again, roughly in that previous slide, you've built in, a 33% contingency because of the potential, which again, part of that is chasing. And as you start chasing, now you wind up in structural worlds where things cost us more than simple skim coating and things like that. So I understand it. I think the challenge with this project, and I mean, it's a challenge for you guys, it's a challenge for all of us, and it's a challenge to make a recommendation to the board, is that there's a whole lot of unknowns here. There's some significant unknowns here, and those can spiral pretty quickly in a lot of different ways. And I mean, I think that's the concern, at least that I'm expressing. I can't speak to other members of the committee, but there's a whole lot of unknowns here that we seem to be pushing through, and not really addressing some potential for different options, different opportunities, and kind of big picture thought around the district as a whole. And again, where the second part of this conversation is then where are we taking funds from in order to pay for this? So.
Yeah, and I'd love to get to that part, but I think we first have the issue of getting a recommendation from the committee on the overall direction, which is the point we're at now.
And the overall direction is about, that you're asking for, is the direction to move forward with renovation.
That would be staff's recommendation. I say it would be, that is staff's recommendation. And our next action based on that would be to hire the architect to do that. But obviously we haven't hired them yet. The board will do that hopefully on September 1st if we go that direction. We just would like the committee's input.
I mean, my opinion is similar, I think, to what we've been hearing, is that I would absolutely prefer that we do a renovation versus discuss the idea of a new building. I think we would lose a tremendous amount of public trust if we said we needed a new building. And we want to save every resource we can for sustainability purposes. We don't want to tear a building down that has plenty of things that are still usable, aside from which the time it would take to lose a community school to do a new building. So I would be very strong in recommending that. I guess my only question was, and even the estimate, I don't necessarily have a problem with. I did think that the architect's fee sounds high in relationship to that. That was my only, the only question that I kind of still have out there. And I was just wondering, are there other consultants under that fee, or is that strictly architect's fee?
There are. That's a good point. I mean, it includes, so this architect that we're recommending is actually DTR, who was the waterproofing consultant on the previous round of investigation. They are an architecture firm that does have some DSA experience and obviously have a lot of water intrusion experience. But of course, they have their full roster of consultants under them. When we looked at their proposal, there's one that felt a little bit high, which is their mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and low voltage consultant. And they've actually since reduced their price, but it still feels a little off. So I'm going to be approaching them again tomorrow to see what we can do about that. This project, so we're really talking about, if this is an $8 million project and their fee is $1.2 million, that's 15%. Now this is we actually think the cost is going to go a little higher than the 8, but this is also, I guess it's a $9 million project. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This is a complex project, of course. Now, they have a leg up because they're very familiar with it. They've actually been on site. They've done a lot of that preliminary work. But we're dealing with any renovation, of course, we know is going to be a little more complex. We're telling them you have to do more investigation prior to the design. I mean, that's what Michael was talking about, the design development phase. We're also telling them you're going to be on site every week, and they're committing to be on site every week to deal with it. So the fee is maybe higher than you would expect on a job this size, but I don't think it's outside the realm of what would be reasonable, if that makes sense.
Okay, and I'm not always sure with these type of projects what the percentage is. I would assume like closer to 12%, but you tell me if that's not in reality.
If we were looking at new construction in the range of $9 million, I think we would be expecting 12%, maybe 10, maybe 10, 11, 12. Mm-hmm. For a modernization project, or in this case, really a repair project, I don't feel surprised when it goes a bit higher than that. So, and again, They were not the least expensive proposal we got, but I wasn't a reviewer, so I'm gonna recap what I've been told by the reviewers. They were the best proposal that we got, and they showed a level of competence that, you know, this is their bread and butter. It would be hard to find someone more competent to do this work. So the recommendation from our review committee was, yes, we understand that they're more expensive, but this is probably one of those cases where you get what you pay for, and we recommend going with them. And so that's gonna be staff's recommendation going to the board as well.
Maybe share.
Okay. Well, based on that, I feel more comfortable.
Thank you, Thomas, for reminding me. So,
For the people that weren't here.
sure. So, in part because of, I think, the complexity of the project, and it's also just not a, you know, if you're a designer, this isn't a fun, exciting project, right? I mean, it's literally, hey, we've got a building that is like Swiss cheese, can you fix it?
It's also a project with a lot of risk.
And there's risk.
A number of our architect friends sort of looked at it and went, I don't want that.
So we sent this to dozens of architects. We got 2 proposals. The 2 proposals were from Little, who was the architect on the previous job, who helped with, you know, the investigation, and DTR, who was the waterproofing consultant that helped with the investigation. Now, in fairness, those 2 knew this site and project better than anyone else. Anyone who did propose against them would have been at a disadvantage, but we went through the public process to try to, you know, generate whatever interest we could. These were the only 2 who were willing to propose on it, and honestly, both did a good job in their proposal, as I understand it, but you know, I think the recommendation was, I believe, unanimous that we should go with DTR. But thank you, Thomas, I had forgotten to bring that up.
So presentation over, I mean, are we in?
Yeah, the presentation's over, we're in discussion. I was gonna ask Alexis if your comments before might actually be a motion, or if you wanted to frame it as a motion.
You know, I had just another point I wanted to raise, and I sort of hinted at it in a previous comment. And Sam said something that reinforced my thinking, is that whether, you know, a problem or a crisis such as this, and it's a challenge for the community and for the district, and I understand that, whether it presents an opportunity for some big picture thinking about facility needs in the district and looking again at our assets and how we can best utilize our dollar resources as well as our physical resources. The fact that you were able to, and I'm not abandoning the idea of a neighborhood school, a community school. That seems vitally important, and I understand from a kind of community and philosophical perspective that one wants to retain that. But given the various assets that the district has in terms of buildings, including the one we're in now, which is offices, administrative, previously was a school facility, whether there's an opportunity for the district to be looking a little more creatively in terms of the opportunities and the assets. I mean, I understand the argument for the repair, and I'm not quarreling specifically.
No, understood.
But I think I'm wondering whether at the same time, or whether they'd be working at odds to each other, that there be a consideration, a look again, because there are lots of moving parts here. We've got, you know, SMS projects that are pending in process, some might be pulled. I mean, I know that's the next
Right.
conversation we're going to have. But, you know, we've got, you know, you were able to, Carrie was able, you know, you scrambled, you were able to put Smash at the Obama Learning Center. The high school program moved to the college campus. I mean, you discovered opportunities. The challenge presented itself, and you were able to sort of scramble. Of course, the dispersion of the Muir student body is the critical issue. Smash draws from the entire city, does it not?
It does.
It does.
So it's not a site-specific, is there a reason Smash has to be where it is. So these are the questions I'm asking as a relative newbie to the committee. Can these questions be asked? Is there an appetite for looking at these larger?
So I think Carrie can probably address a lot of those questions directly, but one thing I will say is the good thing about what you're asking, or in response to what you're asking, is we had to go through some of that exercise to figure out how to be in school this year, right? Because we knew we weren't going back to mere Smash at the beginning of this year. So I think Carrie and some other folks from the district went through at least a significant portion of that exercise, like, okay, we need to be thinking out of the box because there is no in-the-box answer here. And so as they did that, I think they may have considered a lot of the things that you're mentioning, or that no one has mentioned, but I think at one point we did talk about Madison campus, right? Like, which is what SMC rents from us. Could we do there? Well, that didn't work for a particular reason. But I think they went through and did an exercise that is really very, very similar to what you're asking about
But
now.
there was a time-specific.
Now, that was a short time, right?
There was the emergency aspect.
But I think it also allowed them to, and Carrie, I shouldn't be answering for you, but that was an opportunity to think about things like, well, for example, if there was something where they said, well, if we had an extra year, we could make that work. Well, that would be like within the realm of what you're talking about. So Carrie, is that?
I mean, but, what I'd like to assure you is that type of creative questioning and thinking is and has been going on. And it was a real deep question of, I mean, there has been a talk about, can we move the PBL program back onto the Samoa campus? And there was a real deep look at that. And there is the idea that maybe in a few years that might be a possibility, but it was completely rejected as something that could happen now. Both with availability of space in classrooms and the nascent developing quality of that program. One of the things that's true is that Smash absolutely has to be together. It's not like it could be blended with another campus. So we looked very deeply at, they need to be by themselves. And then there's also a desire to expand Smash. So what would happen with that? So, I mean, there is a whole, what the superintendent called the phase 3 part of this question, which is, the first part was, let's get us through last school year with everybody safe. The second was, let's get everybody someplace for the beginning of the school year. There is a whole phase 3 question of what happens on that campus, what happens to Smash, what happens to Muir, what happens to the PBL program. All of these programs is something the superintendent is intending to have deep discussions about over the next semester. And we are going to take a look at our facilities, and we are, and in many ways, this is also asking beyond Measure SMS, where we go next. Because we do anticipate that there will be another bond coming up, because we have needs, and we already addressed that. So that is all part of a conversation that is happening and is going to happen, unless I hear something really different on September 1st from the board. So far, the communication and direction, both from the superintendent and from the board, has been get that campus, see if we can fix the campus, and if we can, get it back open as quickly as possible.
I understand the urgent aspect of this. I'm encouraged to hear about this phase 3 thinking, but we've got sort of maybe two sort of parallel processes underway. In other words, the commitment to repair and refurbish, bring that campus back. But
we're always in a place where we can change course, but, the deeper we go down the course, the more expensive it's going to be, or the longer it would be. But we are we are always looking at the question. It is something that's being discussed.
Well, okay. In that regard, I would say that I would like to hear a message coming from this committee that encourages that investigation. I think at the same time we can be supportive of the plan and the district, but as we're talking about that first phase, that design development, and whatever comes out of that, we might have some surprises that might cause you to rethink
Margaret, that's just it. I mean, it's a separate track. Right now, the issue is, are we going to refurbish the existing facility we have?
Right.
And how it's used, other than differently than it may have been used, is a separate conversation.
Well, that's an interesting point.
So right now, and we have a whole other issue before us, you know.
I know, and we were hoping to let you go in about 10 minutes, and we have a lot more to discuss, which I'm really worried about time.
Determine whether our committee is going to support, you know, the staff's recommendation to the board.
We can do that.
So
I really want to put this sort of on the record as something that I think our committee could be engaged in.
We can come back to it on another agenda, not on our agenda today, so.
But
So I think we would need a motion to, we'd need a motion to do what you're saying, Rob.
I'm just happy to make the motion. I know that, I don't know, Alexis, if there was a sort of friendly amendment to it. Right now, it's just to support recommendation that the board approve the contract that's going to be before them to move this ahead. That's the right.
Yeah, in furtherance of repairing the building. Yes.
Versus is there a second to that motion?
So did someone, Ralph, what's your motion?
Motion is to support the staff's recommendation that the board approve the contract to continue to work on this project as has been presented.
That would be the architect's agreement.
to move forward with repairing the Muir Smash campus. Yes. Yes.
So Amy's giving a thumbs up, which looks like a second.
I second.
Okay.
Now,
Alexa says,
Okay, so Alexa seconded the motion. So we'll put it to a vote because I know we need to move forward to the next one. So all those in favor?
Roll call.
you know, it's probably better to do a roll call here, Sam.
Yeah, let's.
Do you want me to read off the names so we can get them, Sam, or do you want to do that?
If you could, because I don't know everyone who's in the room, because all I see are you and Carrie. So,
Okay, so why don't we start with Ralph?
Yes.
Thomas? Abstain. Margaret?
Yes.
And then we've got Amy,
Yes.
Alexis,
Yes.
Sam.
no.
So it passes 4-1-1.
All right.
Okay,
And let's.
so
So with that, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is discussing the funding for and where we would pull funding from. So I'm assuming we've got some sort of presentation ready.
we do. So my apologies, because when I did this, I forgot to update the date on the front page. This is almost identical to what we presented last time. So let's go ahead. So this is just done as a reminder. It's okay. This first page is just a reminder. This was the original allocation recommended by this committee after the subcommittee did its work, which resulted in almost $88 million of total project costs. And not coincidentally, $88 million is the budget that we have allocated from Measure SMS. I was going to try to help. The board took an action in February of this year, which was to move forward, and again, based on FDAC recommendations, to move forward with Grant, Franklin, and Adams projects. Also to move forward with McKinley and Rogers, subject to the review of the campus plans in the context of the historical resources reports. At that time, this committee created a design review subcommittee, which has worked with district staff and our architects to review those projects. And they also gave us the direction to move forward with those, to continue developing the campus plans for Roosevelt and Lincoln, but not go forward with those projects under SMS. Now, the reason for that was because there was a 1-year plus time impact associated with the historical resources reports, which led to a 1-year plus cost escalation. And go ahead, Carrie. That brought us to costs that were higher than originally budgeted, as would be expected. You can see the estimates on the screen, which combined, when including Roosevelt, combined to 104.7 million. Again, our budget was 88 million, which left us 16.7 million over budget. You can also see that the Roosevelt full project cost at that time was anticipated to be around 17 million. So removing it brought us down right about to the $88 million mark. Again, this is a recap because you guys were all involved with this and the board gave us this direction. Now, if we look today at the numbers, if you look at the bottom, the bottom table, these are more current total project cost estimates. You'll see some changes here. So for example, you're gonna see that the grant project estimate went up. It went up from 9.7 to about 13.9. However, the Rogers estimate went down from 28.2 to 24.8. So they've all adjusted a little bit. Surprisingly, the biggest one, which was McKinley, moved the least. But in any case, this is our current estimate of the projects that were directed to go forward in February of 22. It was also right around 18 million, just a hair over it. Now, of course, since February of 22, we've had the water intrusion issues, which is why we're talking about this today. Go ahead, Carrie. And so now, this is a recap. Actually, I'm not going to go through these, but this is how we get to the numbers that you just saw. So, got our Grant and Rogers here. Go ahead. Franklin and McKinley. Just a reminder of what those projects were. JAMS, and now I've added in the Muir Smash water intrusion project.
But you see in the water intrusion that there's the other soft cost, including swing space, which is part of the rental from SMC, and the cost to move everyone and eventually move them back and do some work at Muir Smash, at the Obama campus to make it ready for Smash.
So now we go forward and we say, okay, this top one again is a recap of what you saw a few slides ago. This is the current estimates, not including the Muir Smash project. So now, but of course I've removed Roosevelt and Lincoln there. Now as we go down, we'll look at we'll look at some scenarios to fit us within that 88 million. So the first one is all of the numbers, including the Muir Smash project and our existing projects, 107.8 million. Now, considering that the water intrusion project is 19.6, you won't be surprised to see that that is about 19.6 million over budget. The options that we have are, if we're going to be deferring projects, we could defer grant. Now, if we defer grant, we would remove some costs, but not enough to get us down to 88 million. You'll see that what I've left in there for the estimated total cost for grant, you'll see a similar number on Rogers. That would be for money that's been spent on the project so far. So that would be things like the design through permitting. So it's so far plus what we expect. So this would be designing it through permitting. It would include DSA fees. It would not include construction administration, of course. It would not include construction management, and clearly would not include construction. But those are costs, so we need to take the costs that we have spent and are spending, we need to take into account. Next option is to remove Rogers. If we remove Rogers, we can get below the 88 million. Brings us down to 84.5. If we remove Franklin on its own, we see that we cannot get there. We're at $98 million. Now, even if we took Grant or Franklin plus the JAMS library, the JAMS library project is pretty small, $1.7 million. Adding that to either the Franklin or Grant project doesn't get us down to the 88 million. Another option is to remove both Grant and Franklin, which gets us down to 85 million, below our budgeted amount, giving us the ability to do all of the projects other than Grant and Franklin. And then the final option that we came up with was to remove McKinley. It is a bigger project, the design fees are higher there, and the permitting fees will be higher, so the amount that we're showing as what will have been spent is a little higher at 2 million. It's obviously the biggest project, so removing it will actually put us much lower than our budget, getting us to about 72.4 million. And then at the bottom is just a little quick recap of what each of those options, what each of the options that do get us below 18 million would result in. So if we deferred Rogers, we'll be 84.5 out of 88. If we defer Grant and Franklin, we'll be at 85.5 out of 88. If we defer McKinley, we'll be at 72.4 out of the 88. As far as potential needs, for that remaining amount between the summary numbers and the 88 million. Of course, it's always nice to have a little bit of a cushion in case there are overages. We've seen in the past, I mean, dating back to, I think, Measure BB, there have been, when you budget every single penny and projects go over, that was a bit of hyperbole. When you budget down to the nearest $1 million of the entire budget and a project goes over, you can eat up that remaining amount very quickly, and we could get into a situation where the district doesn't have the funding to finish a project. So it's always nice to have a little bit of a cushion in case something unforeseen occurs with these projects. And then the other option is to start designing projects, the next round of projects. Now, whatever we do here, we will end up deferring something, or more than one thing, I suppose. Those projects are ready to go. They're deferred until the funding becomes available, which would likely be the next bond. We'd also like to have other projects ready to go. So, for example, we'd like to be able to complete the design on Roosevelt and have its first project ready to go. Same thing with Lincoln. Potentially, we could use the remaining funds here to design some of those projects and get them ready to go once funding becomes available for construction. Anything you want to add to that last part there, Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, the benefit is that we get ahead on some things, and if we, we can go out for a bond every even year, and we have the opportunity to go out in either the primary or the general election. If we were to go out in the primary in March, we could potentially start, like if we deferred the McKinley or the Grant and Franklin or any of these projects, if we went out in March, we potentially could start those in the summer of '24. If we wait till November, some of them could start in January, the others would have to wait until the summer of '25. So the sooner, there's a little bit of the sooner we can get the projects going and constructed, both the sooner we get students in better learning facilities, but also, hopefully escalation's coming a little bit off of what it currently is, but we've been seeing escalation about 1% a month. So every month we delay, every 6 months, every year is money. And so the sooner we get in, the sooner we get there. So there is some good idea to sort of get a bit of a jump, and having a little more money if we defer McKinley gets us a little more of a jump than if we were to defer the other projects. Yes, Thomas?
Yeah, just to that point, because I know we talked about the escalation, you mentioned even years. I mean, technically, that means the district could go in '22.
We would have had to, the board would have had to take action by now. But also, just technically, it's not only in even years, but I think if we're not on the primary or presidential election, it's not a 55% threshold. I think it's a 2/3.
Yeah, we say we can go at any election, but it's only on the twos and the fours that we can do a Prop 39 election, which is what allows us to the 55% threshold instead of a 2/3 threshold.
I think it's 2/3.
It is 2/3, and while we often pass at 70%, is that it feels a little more comfortable going out with the 50, trying to get over 55.
I'm gonna, for me, I think it's the two projects that have the most impact on the campus are Rogers and McKinley.
Mm-hmm.
The The others are sort of the setups, as you know, say, if we pass the bond in March of '24, you immediately start and continue the next project. That period, if we cut Rogers and or Franklin, we're delaying for much longer period of time. And it's going to, the cost potentially is going to be a lot more as we move forward. And of those two, you know, Franklin is the one that most is Rogers is TKK.
Mm-hmm.
You know, McKinley is sorry, third grade, yeah, and administration. You know, it's the most forward-thinking in terms of meeting our ed specs for how we want our campuses to look. And I think has the greatest impact to help a campus that, particularly exterior spaces are the least desirable, probably, you know, of all our elementary schools. And I'm worried that it would just push it out. Who knows what it would do to that project going forward. So I would actually, for the Franklin project, have them ready to hit the ground with the bond, not jeopardize the two that are the newest and have the most impact on our educational facilities and the education of our students, you know, moving forward the quickest time.
Yeah, I want to reiterate something though you said, which is why I would lean against, yes, please. Recommend a little bit of moving, you know, is that the grant project and the Franklin project, we need to, we can't move forward with the next phase at those campuses until we get these projects done. And so. Those are smaller projects, take a short period of time. Yeah, but it's a delay of it's a year to a year and a half, depending on when we get started with them, that would be delaying the next project on those campuses, where McKinley was originally planned as to start in '24. We just moved it up to save money because we had it. It's like the architects felt like they could get it out the door. So we moved it up because it potentially saves a year of escalation. So,
Yeah, on a school like that, though, with McKinley, you don't want to let any escalation happen with the cost of construction the way it is. To be able to achieve something that looks like that, I think you would want to get that project done. It's a substantial project for the community, and I wouldn't want to have to compromise it later due to budget constraints. Whereas Franklin, personally, I've never heard positive community outcry for Franklin. I only hear people saying that they'd rather not have the makerspace. Even though we know it's part of the ed spec, I hear so much pushback on it that as things continue to evolve, I'd be happy to table Franklin.
yeah, where I hear the support for the makerspace is not from the community, but I do hear it pretty strongly from the teachers. The teachers are pretty loud about it. But I hear what you're saying. No, it fits into an educational plan for them. It's not just, it's not the cherry on top or ice cream. It's, you know, it's something that actually integrates with the way they're teaching. So, but we have a little bit of change at Franklin. You know, we have a new principal, and who knows where, you know, but we can't really build for who the principal will be because they change. They change faster than we build, usually. But I hear what you're saying, Alexis.
That being the historic issue, maybe just for people that weren't here, we were talking about the execution. What was the project that maybe may not be as important as you think?
Well, it was that of the projects we're talking about, McKinley would be the one that we're still working toward resolution of issues around a potential historic district. Historic district potentially historic.
That's built into the timeline that we have.
It is, and hopefully we can find a resolution and we can easily pass through the CEQA process without it getting hung up. You know, also, with our recent projects going through DSA, McKinley has the greatest one potential for getting hung up in DSA just because it's a bigger project. So we have some potentials of delay with that one, a little more than others. I mean, you know, we're doing all we can to hit our marks. I mean, we were.
Just probability.
Yeah, yeah, we're just, you know, it's just, it puts another probability piece in.
Although I will say, when we met with folks from the Conservancy the other day, it was generally positive is the way I would describe it. I mean, we made progress.
It felt like there was a path to remove those obstacles. It wasn't completely clear, but at least it opened up into a path. You know.
Yeah, I would just like to sort of weigh in. I appreciate what Ralph is saying, and I think that the Franklin, I mean, I've always had a question about the makerspace as something that really is sort of, there's a compelling need for it. But on the other hand, I'm very attracted to that $72 million figure there. That seems like, given the environment we're in with escalation of costs, and also the flexibility that it gives the district to actually position itself in a much more favorable way when the next bond issue comes, with not just a blank check in a sense, because I think politically it would be very appealing, more appealing to voters. So I'm looking at this from a sort of.
I mean, let me answer this, if you don't mind.
And so, I think that there is a compelling reason to defer McKinley, as much as I know the need exists at the campus, and I understand Alexis's point about, you know, meeting the ed specs, and I think if the historical issues can be resolved, the sort of compatibility issues can be resolved, which a good architect should be able to accomplish. I think I'm interested in that $72 million figure, just from the district and sort of the management and the budgeting perspective, apart from need and all the other issues that I know are sort of moving these projects forward. So that's kind of my thinking at this point. I'd like to hear what other.
So I do want to say one thing that will be true when we go out in '24, which wasn't true in '18, is we will have a very robust project list that will already be pretty well vetted and approved already through CEQA. We'll know we'll have a very good idea what we're doing. And that will be different than our 2018, but it would be beneficial to also have some things that, when you vote for it, it's not like it's 4 years, 5 years down the road. It's literally will start within a year.
So I think from
a few of those projects.
Whatever decision is made, that's going to be true.
It will be more true with a deferment of McKinley than it would be with Grant, Franklin, or Rogers, only because we have a little more money in the kitty to pre-design.
But the McKinley delivery will take longer. So you can deliver Grant and Franklin faster after 24 than you can McKinley.
True.
So the one question
I mean, actually, I want to turn that a little bit also, is that McKinley will be, if we were to go in March of 24, McKinley would be 40% done, and if we went in November, it would only be 60-70% done, where the Grant and Franklin projects would be almost completed by the time we went out, just because of the time they take for construction.
In other words, they're quicker to deliver either way. I mean,
Yeah.
we could deliver them quicker now, or we could deliver them quicker later.
Right, but if you're asking for bonds for specific projects and you're talking about delivery time, then being able to show that those are going to be delivered faster. I understand what you're saying. You're also, the other argument is, well, we've got projects we've shown we have completed. So I mean, yes, you can make the argument either way, but my statement would be that, you know, again, if you're going out there and you're saying we've got projects that we can get done for you with the 24 money, projects like Grant and Franklin, they're deliverable faster after that money comes through than the McKinley project. So that would be the statement there. I guess my big question around all of this, and again, this the water intrusion repairs from your Smash, is what's the number of students we're impacting? I mean, I think that's got to be part of the conversation here, and kind of part of that bottom line conversation. I get it at Franklin that the teachers really want it. I think Alexis's point about the community is an important point, right? And that could also be a negative against the bond. I understand that as well. But just kind of understanding the student impact of if we were to defer Rogers or if we were to defer McKinley versus deferring Grant and Franklin. Do we have some rough estimates of what our populations look like in those schools and what the impact of these projects are for the community, those schools themselves?
Sam, are you asking you're asking the population of the schools, but I think if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're really saying is how many kids are going to be impacted if we do or don't do each of these. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not about the school population. It's more about the impact.
No, it's about impact to students, and yes, I mean, it's a calculation that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I don't have it specifically on paper, but it is something that I could, I can talk through it. I mean, the impact of, okay, so let's say, I'll go for the easiest. If we go for a March bond, which means we can start in summer of 24.
He's talking about the difference between these projects.
Yeah.
So that part.
No, but what he's asking.
McKinley affects third graders only. Admin, I guess.
No, there's 2 grades at McKinley that
that's what he's asking about. Whatever that answer is, I don't know the answer. I think is that what you're asking, Sam?
Right. So let's take, so we're talking about Muir Smash, right? And being able to do that work means that we've got about 500 students that have been displaced this year, give or take, right? I know that number might not be exact, that we're able to get back into their school in fall of 24, correct? So correct. The project at McKinley, this very large financial impact, right? But what grades, like what's the number of, are we only impacting 200 kids plus the admin office? Are we impacting 500 or 600 kids, right? Like I think that needs to be part of the calculation, or at least it is in my head, right? Of thinking of, what we're looking at in terms of the impact to the school overall and the capability that it then gives that school.
Right, so at McKinley, you're impacting 200 to 225 kids a year that would be in better facilities as opposed to lower quality facilities.
Plus you get to remove portables.
Yeah, that's the outcome of it, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you impact everybody because you get to redo the yard, you get more outdoor space.
You get more outdoor space, you get better garden space. I mean,
we're cutting the outdoor space as part of it. So we don't need to revisit that conversation. Again, you're talking to a McKinley parent who's very familiar with the project. So but I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to be fair and honest to the projects. And so I do think that, again, what we're saying is, what the board is saying is we're prioritizing Muir and Smash. We want to get people back into that school. I get it. It's a $19 million investment. In order to make that, or $20 million, in order to make that investment, we are going to delay the progress or slow down the progress of these other projects. So McKinley, yes, there's the ability to impact 225 students positively. But again, as someone who's had multiple children in those bungalows, while not ideal, they're not the worst places in the world. The impact of not having the maker space at Franklin, what's the impact of not having that to the school community, right? Like that's what I'm trying to get at in this conversation.
Well, the Franklin space impacts all of the students, but they don't impact them every single day, every class. But every class in the school would use it. Similarly with Grant, with the library, it impacts all of the students, but doesn't impact them directly. Now, the TK renovation that happens at Grant, which is part of this, is part of what's necessary because we're having to add TK classes by 25, and the longer we wait, the more we're cramming kids into size classes that are 60% of the size that they're supposed to be without restrooms. So it does make a difference a little more to those TK classes, but that's like 20 kids per class, so 2 classes worth.
How big are those McKinley bungalows that are okay?
960s.
Which is a standard classroom, but.
But TK is supposed to be 1350.
1350.
Right, and that's a great call, Carrie, because yes, it's 40 kids, but that's also a feeder that we're talking about when we're talking about a district that's looking at head count and all those pieces. So again, I think that I just think it's an important piece that we look at, that the Rogers project seems to impact the entire school. Grant impacts a great deal of the school. Franklin, again, I think that there's this, there's the teacher versus parent disconnect, but it's a project that could impact the whole school. The McKinley project is isolated to a portion of the population. Yes, it needs to be done in order to proceed with the rest of the campus, but it is something that a delay of a year does not impact the entire campus as a whole in terms of the current usage.
And you're making a statement which I just don't agree with. You do the McKinley building, it allows a complete change in the exterior space, which impacts every student. Just like the Rogers only does classrooms for a smaller number of students.
Ralph, the McKinley project shrinks the size. The first phase of the McKinley project actually shrinks the size of the outdoor space at McKinley. So I don't see. I mean, it's a wonderful building. It's a beautiful piece. It certainly helps with drop off, which again, as the parent who does it daily, like driving through the parking lot isn't the best thing in the world, but it does not impact the entire campus. It impacts a portion of the campus, and in some ways, only doing phase 1 negatively impacts the outdoor space available to the community. So again, that's as a McKinley parent, I'm willing to sacrifice that project because of the flexibility that it gives to the rest of the district. That's my statement. Again, not everyone has to agree with that, but that is the statement on my end. So
We're really sacrificing it. We will build it, it's just deferring it by a year.
The other thing is in terms of district educational goals, equity goals, where if we delay McKinley or Rogers, we're delaying a Title I school, facility improvements.
I think McKinley's dropped off of Title I. It just has.
Kerry, you made up your mind, so you're just stashing your rationale.
No, I was just correcting that. I'm sorry if I'm trying to sway you.
No, they've all, by the 40% rule, they're all, except for Edison, which is waived for other reasons.
Yeah.
They all need the waiver. They've needed the waivers every year.
I know.
To be still considered as the district to get the title of funds, which it does do.
Right.
So that's not a fair statement that you make. It's no different than Rogers. It's no different than your SMFDAC, I think, at this point. We're all basically just below the 40%.
Yeah. I mean, when we were looking at these projects,
McKinley's gone up in the last 2 years, is the point.
Right.
Is that it's gone up as opposed to where but that's
yeah, when we were looking at these projects a few months back, when we were trying to decide what we could move forward with at that time, I mean, we had the McKinley principal on pleading her case to move the project forward. So I'm just surprised now that that's one of the ones that you're advocating putting on hold.
To kind of add my 2 cents into this discussion. One, it seems to me like the McKinley one, if we push it back, it just means it's farther back, not in all of them. And it just seems like when we were discussing the decisions to do Grant and Franklin, at least my understanding kind of was like, okay, well, what can we do now? It wasn't anything really significant. I mean, it's like a courtyard and helping with the library, but it's not, these aren't big. I mean, they're expensive, but they didn't feel like immediate. They weren't of immediate needs. At least that was my interpretation. And to me, McKinley seems like it has more of an immediate need to continue to kind of start that process. And if it's big, I do think then if we're looking at cost, maybe that should be put into consideration of how much is this going to go up, where we could redo like patios and outdoor spaces later. Those don't need to happen now between Grant and Franklin, at least in my opinion.
I don't disagree with that, Amy. I think my concern, frankly, is, and I keep pointing back to this, is once we get to these costs around Mere Smash, I think they're going up, and I think that we lose flexibility. We don't have flexibility with the other options, and we at least have flexibility if we defer McKinley. I do agree with you that McKinley and Rogers, I think, are the most impactful projects at the starting point. But I think that's, we've lost that flexibility, and then where does that leave us in terms of trying to execute the Mere Smash piece? I mean, look, I think the conversation that we were having around the first part of this issue is, I mean, at this point, we're talking about prioritizing Mere Smash over these other schools. And respectfully to the district, that's due to 20 years of mismanagement from construction to now. Right? Like, this is not a new issue that's taking place at that school. So, and I think we've seen that we've thrown money at it and it hasn't gone anywhere. So again, the vote from the committee was to move forward with Mere Smash, but again, I think that's the decision that's been made, is that we're pushing for that. So what has to be sacrificed because of that? So I know we're kind of talking in circles. I don't know. I guess the best thing would be to see which project gets the most yes votes at this point, or which selection. I mean, there's 6 of us here. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes.
We were 4-1-1, right?
Yes, 6 is correct.
Okay, so I mean, I think if the rest of the committee is okay with it, I think instead of voting yes, no, I would just simply have us vote for which of the 3 options makes the most sense and go with that number as the number to the board. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Another alternative would be not very helpful to the board, but we could say, for example, Rogers had X number of votes, Grand Franklin had Y, McKinley had Z, and just let them know, like, hey, it's a split decision from the committee. Now you board get to make it. They would much prefer, I think, a direct recommendation, but you guys are going to come up with what you come up with, and we'll present that to the board. Whether this ends up being the final recommendation or not, I think your idea of, hey, why doesn't every single person in their comments to this tell me which of these options they prefer? I think that's something you could certainly do, Sam, and it could potentially form a motion that the committee would vote on to make a recommendation to the board.
It might also be helpful to do like a ranked choice.
Does that work for you?
So each person makes a ranked choice of which one you would defer, and then
It's like we live in Alaska and we're voting.
yeah,
I know.
Yeah,
I don't really want to elect Sarah Palin. So Well, I mean, it's more for the committee. Do we want to do yes, no on each of these three? Or do we want to simply weigh in with, there's 6 of us and, 4 of us are going to choose this, 1 will choose this, 1 will choose, I'm just throwing out the numbers. I don't know does anyone have a thought on which approach they prefer to take?
Say that again?
So the options would be that we put each up for a vote and we vote yes or no, or we simply, we put each one up and, there's 3 people that vote for this one, there's 2 people that vote for this one, and there's 1 person that votes for that one, and then we make our recommendation to the board. Or we can either say we make a recommendation to the board, or this is where the committee stands in terms of their prioritization or suggestion.
Yeah, well. Say, who wants to prefer, Rogers, who wants to prefer, Frank, who wants to prefer Kinley, and I guess report to the board or not, whether the committee was,
I mean, well, let's see what the results are. Sam, do you want me to,
Yeah, let's
go through each person's name and we can ask each person just to say which of the
Yeah.
deferral options they prefer?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so let's start online with Sam.
I would defer McKinley.
Okay. Amy?
I would defer Grant and Franklin.
Okay. Alexis?
I would defer Grant and Franklin.
Okay. Margaret?
I would defer McKinley.
Okay. Thomas?
I would defer to
Okay. Ralph?
Frank.
Cool, so it's a 3-3 tie.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to the decision, now they got the, we don't decide, we decide.
You're right, you're right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if I expected that, but,
I
okay.
didn't know what to
We try to
expect,
keep
but.
it fun for you.
You did, you kept it very exciting. So I think the next step, Sam, would be, for the committee to decide, do we want to go with a recommendation that basically says, don't defer Rogers? Because that's definitely something I heard. But the other 2 were 50-50, or do you guys think there's a way to reach a consensus?
I have a question for you. You've given us 3 options. In your analysis, is that the best way of configuring the options? Are there any other?
I mean, sure.
Yeah.
If there's some sense that Franklin is sort of a vanity project, and that.
So I hear you. I think the issue
Offended
is.
by that statement, but okay.
That she's just using it as an example.
Okay.
So here's the thing. If we looked at, can you actually go to the first one that shows this at 117? No, this one's fine, 107.
Yeah, this is the 107, this is all of them
So the bottom
together.
half of this, what you can see is we need to save about $19.8 million to get down to 88. Can you go back to that one? Thank you. There are no options that are combining any 2 that get us down below that number other than
The one.
Grant and Franklin, right? So I did try to look at some, what we could do is reduce it further, but that's really not the goal. I mean, the goal is still to build as much as we can and still,
Yeah.
so,
Grant by itself does not do it, Rogers does. Franklin by itself does not.
right, and.
Grant and Franklin together do,
And any of those
and the McKinley
with
does.
jams also don't get all the way there. So it was really, there are 3 options that got us below 88. There are multiple options that would get us further below 88, but they're not, they're not on the table, because I didn't want to say, well, we could do nothing and still have 88 million. Of course we could.
Is this also on this week's board agenda?
This will, okay,
On the September 1st board agenda.
okay, but it will be a discussion for the board, not an action item.
They give us direction on what to do with the budget, because we don't go to them and say, hey, we're about ready to spend $19 million, and let's not talk about what happens with budget.
Right, of course.
So we go to them and say, our budget will have to adjust, how would you like the budget to adjust?
So-
yeah, two
I
parts.
think technically this doesn't need to be decided immediately anyway, because we're going to keep doing the same thing. We're gonna keep designing these projects up through permitting.
Right.
So until it comes time to, I mean, okay, there's one caveat to that, which is, we'd like to hire the contractors to do the work as soon as we can. Which means we're gonna be going through that lease-back procurement for whichever projects go forward. So we don't wanna do that on a project that isn't going forward, which is why for us it's important. But we, the district, won't really be spending money on this to build it until after it's permitted. We'll do some preliminary, services prior to construction, pre-construction services, but technically, we don't need to know this right now. It's just that before we go out to, select the next round of contractors, it would be really, really good for us to know.
We need
So-
direction.
So just to chime in, if and I don't want to speak for Thomas or Margaret, who both voted for me, but is it safe to say that part of a big reason behind deferring McKinley is around the financial flexibility it provides?
Sure.
Yes.
Oh, are you asking us or asking them?
No, I'm asking Thomas and Margaret.
My apologies.
Yeah, I think that's a really compelling argument, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and Thomas is nodding, saying definitely.
And
So I think this.
more, right, because if this initial contract is let, you're gonna know more about whether that 19 million is.
We'll know more, we may not know enough.
Yeah, you're never gonna know. Well,
Right. So I think the statement to the board.
right, the auditorium. I guess I've
Right.
never seen like a number go the other way, so,
Well, and on a job like this, I don't expect it to go the other way.
You know-
exactly.
I'm actually being a little hopeful on this particular.
We have a big enough,
Uh,
33% contingency, but like,
You know-
I'm not like this committee has discussed the auditorium. I'm just saying, anytime we've looked at a significant thing, it's been a pretty big delta the other way. And that's, to me, a key focus, especially if the district's made a decision that they want to get this thing done in 2 years and get those children back on campus, right? So,
Which I believe is,
Sam, to further answer your question, I wish my vote could be based on, as I understand, campus needs right now. And that's unfortunately not the basis of my vote. Because it seems to me that there might, if one were to step back and say, does Franklin really need that maker space? Is that the best use of bond money? I might say no, So I'm not a great fan of that project in particular, but and I have some questions about Muir Smash, quite frankly, which I've expressed, previously, but I don't necessarily want to stand in the way of the process moving forward. So, I have to just put my sort of ambivalence about all of this on the table, and but that's where I stand right now.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I don't think we're at a place where we're ready to, where the committee is at a place where we can make a recommendation to the board with a motion. But what I would state is, I think that the summary that I would provide would be that the committee was split, between deferring Grant Franklin and deferring McKinley, and those that chose to, that were, choosing to defer McKinley were worried about some of the financial implications of the remaining projects and potential overages that deferring McKinley allowed for more flexibility with funds that deferring Grant and Franklin would not.
And then,
And those who wanted to defer Franklin and Grant, it had to do with that the impacts of the Rogers and McKinley projects were much greater to the campuses, and that the time period to do the Franklin and Grant. I'm saying this, but if Alexis or, it's a question, Alexis or Amy or Ralph, if you want to just help me fill in the why defer Franklin or Grant.
Well, I think some of our guiding principles of why we chose this projects were to get rid of portables, number one. And so that's a really important reason to choose projects. And I feel like it also was a project that provided flexibility down the road for swing space. So I thought there was a lot of reasons why we put McKinley forward. And I also think it's a project that would be disappointed if the funding continued to slip away and it wasn't addressed with architecture that was of the standard that it is now.
Okay. Ralph, is that good, or do you want to add, or Amy?
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's not a very all the time project. Or that people, you know, one is that people see an opportunity to try to revisit the entire project. You know, it is a forward-thinking educational project for our district. Yeah, they can address issues that resolve. It's important. I guess I understand why you're bringing it to the board and saying, look, we're doing your Smash, nothing to the other projects we've talked about, but we are moving ahead to, it's important to make sure that, in a way we say, this is what we think, these are the options, we can talk about them now, but a final decision on that won't occur until sometime in the future. We'll get a better understanding of your Smash project.
Mm-hmm.
But we're moving these all ahead. We're behind all these projects, we're moving them all ahead. We're all important to this way. To have people sort of think that we're just going to cut any one of them really at this point. 10% better to go.
Yeah.
I actually agree with that. I mean, I have my personal feelings about the Franklin project personally, but, and some design issues on McKinley, but those are just my opinions, and I'm not, you know, but which is why I'm saying that my vote doesn't represent my understanding of need. And I think that there are needs, bungalows, other aspects that, unfortunately, you know, we're not able to address immediately.
It's really about something occurring, taking precedence to push the start of something off.
Yeah.
Until we go through a bond measure. You know, these projects will be ground ready, so to speak. We can, you know, pass another bond in March, say,
24.
delay the beginning of one or more of these projects. Here's our current thinking.
And we tend to stagger them anyway, because what we really don't want is 6 big projects at 6 different campuses all at once. I mean, so we would be staggering them to some extent anyway, but we'd still like to have some ready to hit the ground running.
Any other comments or things that need to be said?
All right, so I think that gives you guys enough to go to the board with from that feedback perspective.
It does, thank you.
All right, next agenda item, public comments.
We did not receive any requests to speak in public.
All right,
Only one member of the public, but of the press.
number 10, future meetings. We need to schedule our next meeting date.
Yeah, I'm trying to think when the next time that makes sense to do this is. When do you think we should come back next with the SMS project?
I think we need to do a deeper dive into the SMS project before we're going to DSA with them. So I think the minimum, at the very latest, we want to come back in early October. So, I mean.
Okay, so I'll work on getting a date for that, but we're gonna target early October.
Okay.
I mean, everything else is moving along, but that's the next thing would be to really, present where we are with the SMS projects before they're going into DSA. That's also gonna be a time for us to do another review of the campus plans, along with the CEQA process, because we'll be deeply in the CEQA process.
That was actually the thing I was asking.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all we got then, Sam.
All right.
Wait, Sam,
Thank you,
there's-
everybody. Appreciate the
Hang on,
thoughtful.
Sam, Ralph, oh, is it okay?
I was just gonna ask about Roosevelt, because we talked about
Mhm.
the series of projects, where there's, this timeline between now and, let's say, March of 2024.
So I don't,
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt and Lincoln really need their campus plans revisited and solidified, and we have a lot of work to do there, but I was waiting until school started so I could go back to the principals and start to figure out how to get there.
I mean, I think, Ralph, you're asking about that in the
Yeah.
context of future meetings, so I
Yeah.
think that.
Well, not just your meetings, and, you know,
Very much.
those potentially could be close to being shovel-ready
Yeah.
by the time of the bond as well.
So I think what we would do is probably, so that it's agendized, we would deal with that at the next meeting. We'll kind of address where we're going with that. And then there will certainly be follow-up meetings, for example, when we're talking about what is the master plan of Roosevelt. That'll be its own thing. But I think at the next meeting, we can give you an update on what we see going forward.
Maybe you should find, have a discussion this about all these projects and other projects that might be put out there into as part of what a bond measure might include.
Yeah, I think that's
It
right.
might be something in high school, something somewhere else as well.
We definitely want to be having that conversation in October and gearing us up, that I'd like to, I mean, we'll not discuss this a whole lot in the big public before November, but afterwards, I'd like us to have that so that by January, December, January, we go to the board with a shovel-ready list and a idea of what we're gonna start and pretty much start designing so that we are ready for.
So I think we're getting off of the agenda.
Yeah,
So I think,
but that's a
Sam, it
good
would be a
question.
good time to adjourn the meeting.
All right.
I move-
Margaret moves.
Yeah,
Margaret has a motion.
Yes.
I'm move adjournment.
Second.
Thomas second.
Simon seconds. All right. All those in favor? Yeah.
Nobody is saying no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.
everybody.
Appreciate you.
Anybody
No, I'm
want
over here.
to, make a Uber fare to drop me off at home since my ride?
Where are you?
After the football practice, she goes, that's who called. She goes, your ride's here, but